Interesting story to tell. He's an expert on the Ukraine and Russia and other things. I'll let Jim introduce himself a little bit more. Jim, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind? Did I get anything wrong? Or
Well, George, I'm just like you, just a simple barefoot Greek boy. Um, just very briefly, I'm the son of a retired fighter pilot, a career Air Force officer. Grew up in Germany and various places of the United States. Graduated from high school in Athens, Greece, where my dad was stationed at the time. Met my wife there, who was also an American of Greek origin. Her dad was stationed in Athens. And after law school, when I never, ever wanted to practice law, I decided to go into the diplomatic service, served the State Department in Mexico at the Office of then Soviet Union Affairs during the time my dad was the air attaché in Moscow, and then the Office of the Undersecretary of Political Affairs, and then for many years as the foreign policy analyst for the Republican Policy Committee at the Senate, which is like an in-house think tank for the Republican side of the aisle, and then various work in the private sector after that, lobbying, public relations, that kind of thing. So now I mostly do writing, as you mentioned, TV appearances, commentaries in places like Strategic Culture Foundation, Chronicles Magazine, and so forth.
Chronicles Magazine, I'm a big fan. I also see you on RT's Crosstalk every now and then. And now, before we go further, I have a question to ask you. Several years ago, somebody told me that there's this pithy saying in the diplomatic corps to try and explain bipartisanship to foreigners, and I was told that the definition is, well, in America we have two parties. We've got an evil party and a stupid party. The evil party is the Democrats, the stupid party, the Republicans. Every now and then they get together and they do something that's truly evil and stupid. We call that bipartisanship. I was told that you originated that. Is that correct? Or
I don't know that I originated, but I got it out into public parlance. What happened was that this was sometime in the 1990s, not too far after the end of communism. There was a group of Russian, I think they must have been members of the Duma, where this is back when we were much friendlier then. When we thought that Russia was going to be a nice, secure satellite. So the Duma members were welcome, and they came to visit the policy committee, and they were a little puzzled by this whole Democratic and Republican thing. And I don't know where the concept really originated. As you know, the stupid party has been a name for the more conservative party going back at least 200 years in the United Kingdom. The Tories are always the stupid party. I think the Republicans certainly deserve that moniker as well. But anyway, I explained that to them in that way, and the reaction was basically, "Oh no, yeah, we understand. We have something similar." And you find that from people in a lot of countries. What then got it out there, though, is I think I mentioned that at one point to Sam Francis, the late Sam Francis, used to write for Chronicles. Yes. He published something on it, which is what you were reading from. And at the time, I guess he thought it would be necessary to protect my identity, so he simply attributed to a Republican staffer. That was me, though. So anyway, that's how it sort of got out there. But I think, unfortunately, it's a pretty spot-on description of what we're in our duopoly. Look, I can remember back in the old days, the communists used to say that in America we don't really have a democracy. We just have two factions that have a power-sharing agreement between them. Turns out they were kind of right about that.
Unfortunately, I believe you're correct. My only claim to somewhat fame is I picked up this moniker for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it was occasional cortex, and I put it out there now a couple of times, and it's really taken off. Again, I can't remember who first came up with it. I think it was Kurt Schlichter. But anyway, regardless, anything I could do to carry water and expound it is fine.
Well, real quick, the other observation on the two parties that strikes me is what Huey Long once said. He said it's like a restaurant. You got a row of Republican waiters on the one side and a row of Democratic waiters on the other side, but the legislative grub is all cooked up in the same Wall Street kitchen.
Yeah, that was Huey Long, right?
That was Huey Long back in the 1930s. Then, of course, they killed him.
Yes, they did. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't kill Lindbergh.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, that's another story. Yeah.
that's another story exactly. Okay, well, let's get right to it. Yesterday, by the way, this is April 23rd, which on the new calendar is St. George's Day. Anyway, Holy Tuesday. We probably won't post this until later in the week or after Easter. We'll see. Regardless, yesterday, actually Sunday, excuse me, Volodymyr Zelensky, probably mispronouncing his name, didn't just win the presidency, he slaughtered Poroshenko. I've already written something about that yesterday, and I put it out there, but these were my first thoughts. I don't know if you had a chance to read them, but I want you to expand on what this means as far as Russian and American relations, Western Russian relations, Ukraine, or anything like this. So have at it, if you don't mind.
Well, first off, yes, I have written what you posted about that, and I agree with your comments. I think the short answer to your question is nobody knows. That first off, even let's assume Zelensky really does want to change the status quo in some way. It would be a very, very open question whether he will have any ability to do that. Not only because he's got his own oligarchic interests behind him,
Yes.
but also he's contending with the deep state in his own country. If you think the Washington swamp is bad, take a look at the Kiev swamp.
Right.
It's in many respects it's the same swamp. When people told me there's a new president in Ukraine, my first thought was, you mean the U.S. ambassador has changed? I mean, that's who the real president of Ukraine is, Maria Yovanovitch, a great proponent of LGBT rights and other things, as we'll probably get into at some point. But Zelensky in his campaign has sort of straddled things a bit. He's talked about having a friendlier attitude, for example, toward the Russian language. He's campaigned partly in Russian. Has mentioned the idea of maybe creating a national Russian media station, which, complex thing in terms of the language politics of Ukraine. But that's a fairly positive direction from him. On the other hand, he has the standard catechism on NATO, EU membership, and all that other kind of stuff, and we're going to regain all this territory in the East. Well, we'll see. We'll see what he wants to do. If he does decide he wants to reach out and come to some accommodation with Russia, he's got of course very strong nationalists within Ukraine. He's going to have to oppose, and he's going to have to oppose the entire U.S. and Western establishment. Because the fact of the matter is, this gets back to American politics. Trump campaigned on wanting to improve ties with Moscow, and I would say that was among the number one reasons for Russiagate, for the whole false accusation of so-called collusion, in order to try to make sure that cannot happen, no way, no how. And I think, unfortunately, for the remainder of his presidency, however long that turns out to be, there will be no improvement in ties with Russia, and things could actually get a lot worse. And I'm scared to say, at some point, could pass a point of no return. And that's I think the big picture we're dealing with here, and that's the context in which we'll see what, if anything, Zelensky wants to do for that hamster to jump off the wheel.
Mm-hmm. So it's not hopeful then. I mean, I am aware of these Ukro-Nazi militias that pretty much range freely throughout Ukraine, at least certain parts of it, and they're like the law, so to speak. And I imagine that Zelensky probably can't really bring them to heel.
No, and in fact, people have made something of the fact that Zelensky is Jewish, yes. And so is Igor Kolomoisky, at least by all accounts, his main bankroller. But of course, Kolomoisky, being a politician, he's put his money behind the Azov militia and some of the other neo-Nazi groups because yes. It's good politics. It's in his interest to do so. Well, maybe he'll decide it's in his interest to improve economic ties with Russia. So maybe things will change there. The one area on which I am somewhat hopeful is something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, and that's the church situation.
Yes,
as I've written rather extensively, this whole idea of creating a phony, independent, autocephalous Ukrainian church through the good offices of Constantinople and the State Department, is a geopolitical tool as well as a form of spiritual warfare against not only the Russian Orthodox Church but Orthodoxy in general. And I think there are signs that maybe that thing is dying on the vine a lot sooner than any of us had dared hope. To start with, Zelensky, not as far as I know, I've heard rumors he may be baptized. I don't know if that's true or not. It really doesn't matter. But I don't think he's in the same position to play Henry VIII to an independent Ukrainian church the same way that Poroshenko tried to do, and to make that one of the centerpieces of his re-election campaign. We also saw that meeting recently in Cyprus with the patriarchs of Jerusalem, Alexandria, and Antioch, with the Archbishop of Cyprus. And the first thing you notice, of course, is who's missing.
Yes.
The Patriarch of Constantinople. And I think it's important that these are the key churches of the Greek tradition within the church. I mean, obviously, Antioch is an Arabic-speaking church, but its historic heritage is a Greek one. And to the extent to which the schism of Orthodoxy within Orthodoxy was breaking down along lines of Greek and Russian or Greek and Slav, right. I think the fact that these primates would get together, I think clearly with Ukraine top on the agenda behind closed doors, is a very positive indication that some kind of solution may be in the works. I don't know what that will look like. I hope it's possible for Patriarch Bartholomew to find it in his heart to back down, to realize he made a terrible, tragic mistake that is harmful to the entire church, and that he needs to find some face-saving way to get out of it. And in fact, the Ukrainian schismatics have provided him that already. They're already complaining that what was given to them in the so-called Tomos of Autocephaly was not what they were promised. The so-called Kiev Patriarchate still exists, even though the Tomos had not been issued. They're still holding on to some of their parishes outside of Ukraine, even though the terms of the autocephaly that they were supposedly granted doesn't allow that. So he has ample grounds to say, okay, look, you guys are not abiding by what I granted to you. I'm going to withdraw it. He could do that, and that would have such a huge positive effect on the church.
Yes, it would. And we can always pray that he comes to his senses in this regard. Of course, I've heard it on pretty good authority that he feels his time is rapidly approaching an end, and he would like to bequeath to his successor a newer, more improved ecumenical patriarchate, one that's papalist, quasi-papalist.
Well, let's hope that that dream or nightmare, whatever we want to call it, is in fact what is going on here, and to the extent to which the Ukraine project was the showpiece for that doctrine, let's hope that its failure will have a negative impact on any such aspirations. Because I agree, unfortunately, we've seen this kind of neo-papalism coming out of Constantinople for a very long time, and it's remarkable the extent to which it seems to be almost directly proportional to the decline in the actual throw weight, you might say, Constantinople has actually as a church. I mean, within his own native flock, it's what the Brits used to call a rotten borough. It doesn't exist. The only flock he really has is in the so-called diaspora, people like you and me, that he has only by virtue of being the ecumenical patriarchate. So it's kind of a self-licking ice cream cone. It's complete topology. He is a major figure because he's the ecumenical patriarch, and he's the ecumenical patriarch because he has all this flock in the diaspora. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. It's almost a tautology. But I like your locution better, self-licking ice cream cone. I'm going to remember that one. Okay. So anyway, so you see some hope in Ukraine, at least with Zelensky, at least as regard to the church front, and I tend to agree with you on that. I subscribe to several YouTube channels. I'm sure everybody else does as well. But there's one that showed Palm Sunday celebration of the Metropolitan of Kiev, the real one, Onufriy, at a church service, and there were thousands of people there. I mean, it was a procession. It was outside. And in the meantime, during the enthronement of Epifani Demenko, affectionately known as Filaretovich, I don't know if you understand what's going on there.
He's not literally his son, is he? One never knows, do one?
One knows. And he's called that by many people, let's say.
By many people.
And but anyway, Demenko's enthronement, they had the police there. They had to send him home because there was hardly anybody there. So, of course, I'm not an ecclesiastic and I'm not a theologian, but I am familiar with certain theological terms. And when you set up a schismatic parish like this or a church like this, in which you put crowns and petrahelion and homophorion on charlatans who've never had a valid ordination, you bring unto yourself this concept called bad juju. And
yes, I think that was in the Quintus Sext Council somewhere, wasn't it?
I think so. It was probably
I've got the rudder right here. I'll look it up.
There you go. You know, look, oh gosh, yeah, it's probably in there in some footnote on page 435 or something like that. But you know, the thing is, and again, I have my contacts in the episcopate and in the clergy as well. But this came from a bishop, and when all is said and done, regarding what Bartholomew created there, along with Poroshenko, I mean, there are terrible things. I mean, just going into another man's territory, another bishop's territory, tearing up a tomo single-handedly without in a conciliar fashion. All of this is horribly bad. But the worst thing that affected this bishop, he said that none of these priests and none of these parish bishops have the grace. And they have no valid apostolic succession. None. And, you know, for your typical cradle Orthodox, whether, again, Greek, Ukrainian, Serb, whatever, Bulgarian, I mean, if you're just one or two generations removed from the village,
yeah,
you know, that as I am, that really gives one a lot of pause. You just don't play around with that, and that's and the fact that Bartholomew did this in such a cavalier fashion, I think has shocked. I think really when push comes to shove, that is what has shocked all of the bishops in the Orthodox Church. I was even told that there are bishops in Istanbul who will not, who did not go along with this. They're not on the Holy Synod. It's a rotating Holy Synod from what I understand. And they will not come celebrate with Patriarch Bartholomew because they view him as a schismatic. Wow. So, you know, so this is a slow-rolling schism, I think. First Russia, but nobody else is willing to pull the trigger. But at the same time, they're not willing to co-celebrate.
And I think the real key to it is this: that, well, first off, again, to give the benefit of the doubt to Patriarch Bartholomew, I've been quite critical of what he has done. I want to try to maintain the proper respect for him and for his office. Is that I think he was misled in part as well. I think he was told by Poroshenko, perhaps by the State Department, that if he convenes this so-called reunion council, which turned out to be the Robber Council of Kiev, that not only would the two schismatic jurisdictions show up with the so-called Kiev Patriarchate and then the so-called Autonomous Church, which is really the ones that were self-consecrated. They're not real. The other ones are defrocked, consecrated bishops. The patriarchate, the autonomous church are so-called bishops that were never consecrated properly at all. They were consecrated by presbyters, by priests. You can't do that. And they're all mixed up together now. But he was told that there would be a significant representation from the canonical church and that there would be a united church created. Of course, nothing of the sort happened. Only 2 bishops out of about 90 from the canonical church showed up. They were promptly thrown out of the canonical church for showing up at that council. And I think it's pretty clear that, again, if you look at polling data, but then also look at the life of the church in Ukraine. I have a godson who's a monk in Rokhor who goes to Ukraine periodically, to Chersk and to Pochayev Lavra, to buy liturgical vestments and goods and things there of that sort. So he's got a good feeling on the pulse of the church there in Ukraine. Among people who are believing church-going Orthodox Christians, the support for the canonical church is overwhelming. If you look at polling data, you get a much more even split, or even some majority in favor of the so-called schismatics, but that reflects the views of people who are in no way connected to the church.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a snapshot of this, as you know, the word tomos in Greek, given the way Russian and Ukrainian emphasizes the vowel O, is pronounced Tomas in Ukrainian and Russian, which is identical to the name Thomas, the man's name, except it's spelled differently. You'll see signs, people holding up saying, "We want Thomas, we want Thomas." Evidently, they think it's a man named Thomas. When they're referring to the Tomos, it shows how disconnected they are from what's really going on. But in a polling survey, their numbers show up too. It is pure nationalism, having nothing to do with the church.
Right, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I think greatly saddened one of our commentators, who he puts out all this news data, and they, I think it was greatly saddened, but or it may have been me, I can't remember now, but they examined the research of this. It was a research center in Kiev, a polling firm. And sure enough, I mean, the devil is in the details. You get in there, realize,